Hey, what's up guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun YouTube channel. This is another transhumanist agenda. I haven't done one of these in a while, but I thought it was apropos with the announcement of the release of Deus Ex Mankind Divided. Now, I played the very first Deus Ex that came out. It came with my PC that I bought, and that's probably dating how old I am. I wasn't that old when I played it, but I do remember it. I haven't played the game, I haven't followed it in quite some time, but I knew that the transhumanist theme ran through, especially with these last couple incarnations with Human Revolution that was released a couple years ago, and now Mankind Divided. Now, I don't want to focus too much on the storyline or anything like that, but I do want to mention that according to Game Informer, there are different factions and stuff that are in this, and now the idea of the game is that there was an incident that occurred and now the transhumans are hated by mankind, and Adam Jensen, who is the main character, is responsible for solving this problem. But I thought it was interesting that there's a group called the Illuminati in this game, and Mary DeMarle, who is Mankind Divided's narrative director, she sort of explained who this group is and what they're about in this article, and I won't spend any time really focusing on it, but I thought it was interesting because she was coming at it sort of from a fictional standpoint, but I think she hits on some truth there in terms of looking at the 1% of the 1%ers and, you know, their own individual agendas that don't mesh between the elite of the elite, and how that could cause problems in solving the problem, or the mystery, if you will, in the game. So I think it's interesting that the idea of the Illuminati and stuff like that have been so embedded into culture that, you know, it's showing up in games and with pretty good accuracy in terms of its characteristics. Although, you know, she sees it as a fictional thing, I think she is touching on a chord that overlaps reality quite well. Now, one thing that I think is sort of scary is that this is set in 2029. Now, that's less than 15 years away. So think about that for a second, first off. But what's important to sort of address when we look at games like this, because a lot of kids and young people are going to play it, they're going to be familiar with the word transhumanism. And, you know, I know that's been a theme with the game since its inception, but I don't think they used the word transhuman necessarily back then. But now, especially to those who play games like this, it's sort of a common phrase. They know what they're talking about. They know what the word means. And that's important to point out, because even people in the church, like Christians, they don't know what transhumanist means. Most Christians don't. They have no idea. I think your average person really doesn't, but in terms of where culture is headed, it's being pushed pretty heavily and pretty clearly, as you can tell with games like this. But I do want to point out a few things here. First off, there's this idea that in the game, the main character, Adam Jensen, joins forces with the Interpol-funded task force to hunt down and capture augmented terrorists in a world that hates and fears transhumanists. So there's this divide between normal humans and transhumans, and there's effectively kind of a war or a battle, and terrorism hasn't gone away. So this is sort of maybe a worst case scenario, or maybe just a bad scenario of how these augmented technologies can affect us. You know, if they continue to integrate into society, and society hasn't really gone past terrorism and just evil in general, which obviously it's not going to until Jesus returns. And that's why Matthew 24:22 is compelling when it says, "And except those days be shortened, there would be no flesh be saved." And it begs the question, what does he mean by no flesh being saved unless he puts an end to it? Then we should expect this kind of thing, especially because a lot of transhumanist ideologies and philosophies are put in practice nowadays. And I think there's a lot of people in the military that are already being introduced to such technologies of genetic engineering, of different sorts of replacement limbs and things like that, that, you know, it could just get really, really strange really quickly. But this idea was predicted by Dr. Hugo De Garis quite a while ago. And we interviewed Dr. Hugo De Garis about a year ago. And I'm going to go ahead and play a clip from the interview. You can listen to the whole thing at canarycryradio.com. But he had some very interesting things to say about what he saw as the future of how transhumanism is going to affect society. So here it is. We interviewed a nanoscientist a couple episodes ago, so we're very fresh on our I guess nanotech
jive. Okay, well, so then sitting in the park a couple of years back, and this is in China, I asked myself the question, well, if I took just a single grain of sand and nanoteched it in such a way that on just one atom I could manipulate one bit of information, so have the atom change, oscillating back and forth between excited state, not excited, excited, not excited, and so on. It could flip back and forth in a femtosecond. It's a thousandth of a trillionth of a second. And it's not too difficult. You can estimate how many atoms there'd be in that little grain of sand, that cubic millimeter. Right. And eventually I worked out the computing capacity of that nanotech single grain of sand would outperform the human brain equivalent, information processing rate of the human brain by a factor of something like a quintillion, like a million trillion times. And that just sort of hit me. I thought, oh my God! I mean, if human beings in the future, if you heard of cyborgs, another technical, you know what a cyborg is?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so well, again, for listeners who don't know, a cyborg, that's short for cybernetic organism. In other words, part machine, part human. So a human being, for example, who starts adding this little grain of sand that's been nanotech to their human brain, if they did that, strictly speaking, they'd be a cyborg, but in practice, they would be almost pure machine, because this little grain of sand would outperform the human brain by a factor of a quintillion, a million trillion times. So that cyborg would be 99.999999999% machine, and only 0.00001% human, right?
Wow.
So that really hit home to me at an emotional level, and I thought, oh my God, this technological capacity is so vast that it's only a question of time before humanity is going to have to face up to the writing on the wall.
Sure.
Right.
And ask ourselves, are we, when I say we, I mean the human species, are we going to remain the dominant species, or will we let our machines take over? And if they do take over, they could take over massively. We're not talking about like a machine that's like twice as intelligent as a human being, or 5 times or 10 times. Try a trillion times greater.
Right. When you say take over, do you mean like in a military robot army sense, or just like a intellectual sense?
All of the above. So, thinking along these lines, maybe not as explicitly with those huge numbers, but certainly along those lines in the 80s. And so eventually I thought, well, look, I should put these ideas on paper. So I wrote a book, late 80s, and at that stage, when I was writing it, I felt like a weirdo. There may be 2 or 3 other people on the planet having similar ideas. And then the title of that book was called The Intellect War. I better explain this term, intellect. It's short for artificial intellect. So an artificial mind, or an artificial brain, or an artificial intelligence. They're all much the same thing. And the book was called The Intellect War. And I was predicting that when push really comes to shove, when whole industries start making highly intelligent artificial brains which control home robots and zillions of other applications, but particularly home robots, when millions, if not billions of people in a decade or so from now, and maybe even less, when their home robots start closing I call it the IQ gap, that's the intelligence gap between human level and machine level, when that gap really starts to close, then people will start getting alarmed. You can imagine every year or 2 or 3, they will update their home robot. And because it's such a huge industry, there'll be an enormous number of researchers and professors and engineers and people thrown at the problem to improve the product every year. So every time someone goes out and buys the next version of their home robot, they're going to notice how much smarter it is compared to their previous version. The vocabulary will be richer, and it'll have a sense of humor and cynical, and it can do more tasks, and it'll wisecrack and so on. And so human beings, at first, they'll be amused and amazed and say, oh, my home robot's great, But as the IQ gap closes, like when it starts having the intelligence of like a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old, then all that amusement and bemusement will shift to a growing anxiety. People start becoming worried. They'll see the writing on the wall,
right?
And then you got lots of professors and researchers saying, "Oh, that's nothing. You wait." And they'll trot out all these big numbers, like just what I've been doing. And then people will start feeling alarmed. Now, this is not some distant 22nd century science fiction, maybe. I'm reckoning probably this IQ gap will be starting to close in the 2020s. It's as soon as that. So most of your listeners will be alive. And as a result of this IQ gap closing, I anticipate a great debate. I call it the species dominance debate. And by species dominance, I mean the question, who or what should be dominant species? And by dominant, I mean the most intelligent. Now, as human beings, we've been dominant for, hundreds of thousands of years. We're the top species because we're the most intelligent. And so the species dominance debate is all about whether or not humanity decides to give up that status. Are we going to give it to the machines, or are we going to keep it ourselves? Now, it sounds it's still a bit science fiction-y, but in a decade or two or three, it will become very real, and people will be convinced of that. They'll see with their own eyes their home robots. As they upgrade their home robots, they'll see the IQ gap close.
Right.
And then the debate will heat up. People become more passionate about it. So I talk about. I divide various phases of the level of awareness of this problem into phase 0 is just when nobody's aware of the issue. Phase 1 was where I was in the 80s, with just a handful of other people. So phase 1 is the intellectuals crying in the wilderness phase. And in the 90s, phase 2, that's the action groups, the interest groups, like on the internet, interest groups like Humanity Plus,
Transhumanism,
and
there's a lot. There's a lot of groups. I mean, I document a bunch of them in my film, and there's, Aldebaran Robotics, Applies Foresight International, Machine Intelligence Research Institute. I mean, the Horizon 2020. There's tons.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them now. So phase 2 is well developed, and my feeling now is we're starting to move in a more or less serious way into phase 3. And phase 3 I label simply mainstream. It's the media, Hollywood, magazines, that kind of thing. Now,
so there you go. That's a little snippet from our conversation with Dr. Hugo De Garis. That was just the first 20 minutes. There's another 2.5 hours still with that conversation, so definitely check that out. That was recorded just about a year ago. April 16th, 2014 was when that was released. But he goes into some really interesting stuff, and like he said there, this game Deus Ex is just a prime example of phase 3, mainstream. This is all going mainstream, and if you keep listening to the interview, he believes there's going to be a huge war between what he labels the cosmists and the Terrans. And basically, the cosmists are those who believe that we should continue to merge and become basically cyborgs. The Terrans are those who believe that we should keep our humanity. And he believes that billions will die in this war. And he believes that this is going to be the main central issue, the big war, if you will. We had World War II in the 20th century. Well, he believes the equivalent of that will be this art-elect war in the 21st century. But to really nail this down, there are some questions that I think are so important to this topic, just transhumanism in general. And actually, there's an article that was published on Acagameia back in 2012, The Ethics of Transhumanism in Deus Ex Human Revolution. This is the older game, but I think the main point of the article still applies here. And let me just read the last paragraph. It says, if technology moves in this direction, either in the field of prosthesis or in genetic engineering, this is a central issue that will have to be addressed. Is a life-threatening accident or the loss of a limb an excuse to make someone better than human? What happens when augmentation, whatever its form, becomes a requirement to certain jobs or for promotion within certain careers? Will people with lesser means attempting to improve their lot be forced to take on loans or enter into what is essentially indentured servitude to afford the means for upward mobility? Or are we already dealing with this issue now in the mushrooming student loan debt and the reliance of small businesses on credit to get off the ground? So he sort of ties it into the world we live in right now, but I think these things are happening very quickly. Now, let me just wrap it up here with some biblical precedents here. And for those people who have been tracking with not just my films or anything I've done with Canary Cry Radio or Age of Deceit 2 or anything, but Tom Horn's work and a few other people on YouTube that have been looking at this issue for several years now, there are certain passages that resemble this sort of idea. And again, if you're new to this topic, yes, there are passages in the Bible that seem to reflect a sort of transhumanist future. And how is that even possible, right? I mean, these people are supposed to be just shepherds back 2,000 years ago, but somehow they were shown a vision of the future. And I believe we are living in that future now. So here's a couple verses. First off, you have Daniel 2:43. Now again, some of this might be old news for you, but I'm going to go through it anyway. Daniel 2:43, the King James Version, translates it like this. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So who are they? And why are they mingling with the seed of men? And why are they described as iron? Very interesting. Could this be potentially talking about this future time of transhumanism when there is a they, some sort of intelligence that is portrayed as iron here, mixing with humanity, clay, but they won't mix? Something's not going to be right about this. And, I know there's different interpretations of this. This is sort of a modern spin on this passage, but I think it's interesting. The other passages that are found are in the book of Revelation, and there's a few more, and I won't go through all of them here, but first off, I'm going to go towards the end of Revelation 13, where the second beast, the false prophet, creates the image of the beast. And this was sort of the central theme of my film, Age of Deceit 2, Alchemy and the Rise of the Beast Image. And here, first of all, the first beast that is described earlier in the chapter gets a mortal head wound that is healed somehow. And it is this second beast, the false prophet, that heals this mortal wound. It's part of the signs and miracles, the counterfeit signs and miracles that's performed, along with calling fire down from heaven and stuff like that. Now, I did a study about how this false prophet will present himself as Elijah the prophet. I think that is accurate still, and this doesn't have to be mutually exclusive in terms of, having a sort of transhumanist spin to it all. I think both are possible, and that's what I document in Age of Deceit 2. Actually, there are some rabbis saying that technology is a modern miracle. So again, not far-fetched if you think about it. But if you keep looking on here, it says it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Now, think about what we just heard Dr. Hugo De Garis say. An intelligence that is so far beyond us that, and Basil asked the question, is it going to be militarily? Is it going to be just intellectually? And he said all the above. This image of the beast, this image, it's not organic. It's an image. It's something created. But the false prophet gives it breath. And this image speaks. And it causes those that don't worship it to be killed. And this is also where the mark of the beast comes into play and all that. But, think about that. To me, there's just so much correlation there. I'm surprised that more Christians aren't aware of this passage and where we are in history right now. And if you think about Deus Ex, I mean, the whole thing is about this guy, Adam Jensen, who has these abilities to just be super awesome, powerful, you know, transhuman. And I guess he's fighting for the good guys or whatever, but in terms of just ability. But let me back up here. If you go back up to Revelation 13, the first beast, it talks about after this mortal head wound. And again, this is not chronological. I think this is just the first beast in the first half, and then talking about the second beast in the second half. There's overlap there, because right here in verse 3, it says one of its heads seemed to have a mortal head wound, but the mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who can fight against it? And other translations say, who is like in the beast? Who can make war with him? The Antichrist, or the first beast himself, upon this mortal head wound being healed, is going to be a military force. And that's part of the whole reasoning behind how he will come to power and take over the entire world and all that stuff. But that's part of it. It's a military machine that is explained here. So if you put those together, you have the first beast, a military might, the second beast that creates the image of the beast, who, if you don't worship it, it can kill you, and it has its own breath and everything. I mean, this all sounds like artificial intelligence. This sounds like Dr. Hugo De Garis's description of the Artelect War. And Deus Ex is just a possible scenario of how things might look in the very near future. So those are a couple passages. Let me do one more, because I know you guys are going to be jumping all over me if I don't mention it. And this comes in Revelation 9, and it's during the 5th trumpet. And here's what it says, Revelation 9, verse 6. And in those days, people will seek death and will not find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. Now, what scenario in modern terms, looking at where we are today, what sorts of things can cause a human being to seek death but not find it? Well, think about all of the consciousness uploads and all that stuff that are discussed right now. If man merges with machine, the part of man that is left, and you heard Dr. Hugo De Garis say that, you know, only 0.00001% will be human, that portion of humanity will probably want to die. I mean, whatever humanity is left within that machine, it will probably be tortured, and it will probably seek to die. It would probably feel some kind of pain and long to die. Or if your mind is trapped in a machine somehow, I think you'd seek death. And even scientists and technologists and transhumanists admit that in this sort of possible heavenly scenario, it could actually be a ultimate hell as well. And they recognize that. So this idea hasn't eluded the researchers themselves. So those are some interesting passages that I think you should think about, and definitely share this with people who haven't heard that there is a biblical spin to the topic of transhumanism, and it's very real, and there are passages that seem to reflect a very, very near future from where we are today. So that's it, guys. Make sure to check out that whole interview. I'll link to it in the description section, and let me know what you guys know about Deus Ex and this new game, especially if you guys play it or whatever. I'm not recommending that you play it. It's pretty violent looking and whatever, but you know, if you're a gamer or whatnot and you do end up playing it, definitely share some of your thoughts. And in light of some of these biblical passages, maybe you'll see something that seems to match. So that's it, guys. Thanks a lot. God bless.